go ahead and get started.
Marriage was January the 6th. 4th.
Oh, okay. Very good. Very good. Mark the second chapter, starting at the 23rd verse, Mark 2 and 23, Mark 2 and 23. And it reads as follows. Are we there? Mark 2 and 23, it says, "And it came to pass that he went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day." Just to set this up, this is Jesus and his disciples, okay? Went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day. And his disciples began as they went to pluck the ears of corn. And the Pharisees said unto him, "Behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful?" Verse 25, "And he said unto them, Have ye never read what David did when he had need and was an hungered, he and they that were with him? How he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which it is not lawful to eat, but for the priests, and gave also to them which were with him? And he said unto them, The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath." All right, now this particular passage concludes what we discussed a couple of weeks ago now, where we talked about the disciples of John the Baptist along with the Pharisees questioning Jesus about why him and his disciples did not fast. And Jesus gave them the story or an example using talking about the bridegroom. He says, hey, while the bridegroom is here, everyone rejoice and there's feasting. And after the bridegroom goes away, then there will be an opportunity to fast. So this is coming on the heels of that. This is also coming on the heels of Jesus having had supper or dinner with Matthew or Levi in this particular passage as well, because we know earlier on he had called Matthew into the ministry in this particular chapter as well, and Matthew went on later to become an apostle of Jesus. All right? Now, going back to verse 23, it says, "And it came to pass that he went through the cornfields and on the Sabbath day, and his disciples as they went to pluck the ears of corn." Now, you may say, well, why was Jesus even doing this anyway, and is this okay? He was walking through a cornfield. The cornfield obviously wasn't his or the disciples, because Jesus said that the birds have nests and the foxes have holes, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. So as far as we're aware, Jesus, throughout his ministry, at least the last 3.5 years of his earthly ministry, he did not own real estate property or anything of that nature. So this was not his own cornfield or anything like that. And you say, well, why was the Lord and his disciples plucking corn or harvesting corn out of this cornfield? Well, actually, this was a law that was established in the Old Testament where for people who did not own property, and this is specifically talking about foreigners or widows or orphans, that if these people did not own anything but they were hungry, it was lawful for them to go through someone else's field and to pick up the leftovers. Okay? This was sort of like their form of welfare, if you will. All right? So that the poor people who didn't have much, they would still have an opportunity to get food to eat. All right? Now, if you hold your place here, we'll see this law when it was one of the first times it was given in the Old Testament. I want you to go back to the book of Deuteronomy. So if you go to Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And if you go to the 24th chapter and look at the 19th verse, Deuteronomy 24:19. Deuteronomy 24:19. It's the 5th book of the Old Testament. 5th book of the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 24:19. Are we there yet?
Yes, we are.
Amen. Amen. Got my star student over there. He's on top of it. Okay. Deuteronomy 24:19 says the following. It says, "When thou cuttest down thine harvest in thy field, hast forgot a sheaf in the field, thou shalt not go again to fetch it. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all the work of thine hands. All right? So what is that saying right there? There was a law that said that, hey, if you're out harvesting in the field and if you skip over a plant or something falls out of your basket, and this is recorded not only here in Deuteronomy but in some other scriptures as well. But if something is left behind in the field, don't go back and get it. You leave it for where it says the stranger. Sometimes the Bible uses the word alien, but it basically means someone who is not of that land. You have someone who may come from another country who is dwelling amongst the Israelites, who are dwelling amongst the Hebrew people. And of course, those strangers, those foreigners have no property because they're dwelling amongst the Hebrew people. God makes provisions even for them. All right. Now, it also makes provisions for the fatherless and the widow. So if orphans or widows are involved, then they have an opportunity to go get some extra food as well. Now, what's the key that's missing when you're talking about orphans and the fatherless and widows? There's no man in the home, all right? Which goes to show you the importance of having a man in the home, because if there's a father in the home, that father is responsible for providing for his children. If there is and then the same for the widow women, especially during this time in the Bible days, did not have the jobs or did not earn the money. It was left up to the man. So if a lady's husband passed away, then she often entered into poverty because she had no type of income coming by way of her husband. All right. So this is important. I believe even today that a man play his role in the home, because when you have a situation where someone is either fatherless or a widow, then it's a situation where it may be a lot harder for those people to survive without some external type of help. All right. Now, we see the entire book of Ruth. You don't have to turn there, but if you get an opportunity, you may want to read the book of Ruth. It's just 4 chapters. It's a really short book. But the whole book of Ruth deals upon this concept of being able to, what they would call, glean in the fields. All right. When Ruth, who was a Moabite, she lived in the land of Moab. Her husband passed away. Her father-in-law passed away, and they were entering into poverty. They had no income, so they returned to Bethlehem. They returned to Israel, and when they returned to Israel, Ruth said, hey, I'm going to follow Deuteronomy 24:19. I'm going to go out in the field, and whatever the harvesters leave behind, I'm going to glean that. Okay, because she qualified twice, right? She qualified, first of all, she was a stranger because she was a Moabite when she had come back to Israel, so she was a stranger. Not only that, she qualified because she was a widow. All right? And so she had 2 of the 3 qualifications. There's a possibility she could have potentially have qualified as fatherless, but in Ruth chapter 1, it indicates that she probably had family that she could have gone back to, but she chose to stay with Naomi, her mother-in-law, and return to Israel. All right? So, said all that to say this. If we go back to Mark, the 2nd chapter, Jesus and the disciples are going through the fields. It was legal for them to do that. It was legal for them to harvest leftovers if the other harvesters had already come through and they had nothing to eat. It was okay for them to come through and grab leftovers. All right? But, however, this was still being done on the Sabbath day, and when the Pharisees saw that, they had a problem with that. But then Jesus says to them in verse number 25, he says, have ye never read what David did when he had need and was a hungered, and he and they that were with him, how they went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, and did eat of the showbread. Now, what Jesus is doing here, he's taking the Pharisees back, and you don't have to turn there, but for the sake of time, just mark this in your notes. 1 Samuel, the 21st chapter. 1 Samuel, the 21st chapter, deals with the story where David, who wasn't yet king, this is the same David who slew Goliath, right? David was on the run from the first king of Israel, whose name was Saul. All right, y'all remember that story? And over the course of time, Saul became very jealous of David. He had even attempted to kill David on at least one occasion. And so David was on the run from Saul. Well, David and his men were in the wilderness. They came upon this tabernacle, and they found that there were some Levites and some priests in this tent. And when they went in, they said, "Hey, do you have anything for me and my men to eat?" And the priest said, "No, we don't have any bread or anything here except the showbread that's on the altar." All right, now, trying to keep this as brief as possible, but when it came to sacrifice, especially back in the Bible days, it was not just sacrifice of lambs and goats or meat that was put on the altar. You also had drink offerings for sacrifice. You also had bread or grain offerings for sacrifice. Okay? First fruits, anything that was considered a first fruit was offered as a sacrifice on the altar for the Lord. And so the priest said, "Hey, I don't have any common bread for you to eat. I just got this special showbread that I've placed upon the altar that is the first fruits of the grain. We're giving that back to the Lord." Well, David said, "Hey, look, but we're hungry." So if you read 1 Samuel, the 21st chapter, you'll see that the priest decided to give the bread that was sitting on the altar. He decided to give it to David and his men and let them eat so that, they would be filled and they wouldn't faint. All right? And that's really common sense, right? That's really common sense. And so what Jesus is teaching these Pharisees is that these Pharisees are all about the law. Everything's got to be done by the book, by the law. And no one's using any common sense to say, "Hey, if you see somebody hungry, take the time out and feed them." Just don't say, "Hey, well, I got to obey the law." Because the priest in 1 Samuel 21st chapter, the priest could have easily said, "Well, I can't give you this bread. This bread is God's bread." But he knew that God wouldn't want him to just watch men starve. So God was basically touched the priest's heart to say, "Give those people the bread. Let them eat. You got bread sitting up there on the altar that's just going to go moldy. Let the people eat it." And so the priest gave David and the people the bread. And so Jesus is saying, have you not read that story back in 1 Samuel? You're Pharisees. The Pharisees are supposed to be the educated church people. They're the Sunday school teachers, right? The Pharisees are supposed to know all about the Old Testament, but yet they don't use common sense to know, hey, well, this story was told, then that's the same thing that's being applied here. Jesus and his disciples are hungry. They're eating. And they say, well, you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath day. Oh, okay, so I'm just supposed to starve on the Sabbath day. This is what Jesus is trying to tell them. And he's telling them, he says, have you never read this? You guys are the educated people who're supposed to know everything about Scripture. Yet you're not using common sense to know that God would rather for you to have mercy and justice and grace upon his people and not just be such a stickler about the law. Does that make sense? Because these guys were all about the law. I want you to hold your place here, and I want you to look at, let's turn forward just real quick. Mark 7:13. Mark 7:13. So just turn forward to your right. And here's another passage. We won't go into great detail, but here's another passage where Jesus is criticizing the scribes and Pharisees. And this is what Jesus has to say in Mark 7:13. Are we there? Jesus says, making the word of God of none effect through your tradition, which ye have delivered, as many such like things do ye. And so what Jesus is criticizing them and saying, you guys are all about tradition. You're all about keeping the law so much that you make the word of God of non-effect. God's word means nothing because you're focusing more on the law than you are the purpose of what God is wanting us to do. And he said the two greatest commandments is that you love the Lord thy God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and that you love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said upon these two commandments hang everything else. All right? And I've told this story before. There's been more than once this has happened. On my way to Sunday school, someone is broke down on the side of the road, flat tire, need a boost off or whatever. Okay? Now, I could have kept going because I said, hey, I got to get to Sunday school. I don't want to be late. But would God have blessed that and I've left that person on the side of the road? No, God wouldn't have blessed that. So I stopped, even though I was going to be late for Sunday school, I helped the person change the flat tire. Okay? Common sense. All right? Just like the story of the Samaritans. We talked about the Good Samaritan in the previous Sunday school lesson out of the book of Luke, I believe. The religious people walked by the man who was beat up on the side of the road. Y'all remember that story? The priest went by, the Levite went by, and then a Samaritan who was considered hated amongst the Jews, he was the one that actually stopped what he was doing, got the injured man, put him on his horse or donkey, put him up in a hotel until the man recovered. That's what the Lord wants us to do. He wants us to help our fellow man. He wants us to have mercy and love upon our fellow man. And don't be so narrow-minded that we're so busy keeping the law that we're actually hurting our fellow man by not helping them in however way we can help them. All right? Does that make sense? Okay. And the Lord actually tells us, I think it's Hosea 6:6 and Joel 6:6. Let me see if I can find that real quick. I know I'm kind of jumping around, but it just popped in my brain. I think it's Joel. Let me go to Hosea. I think it's Hosea 6:6. And Jesus actually quotes this. I'm in Daniel, Hosea. Hosea 6:6 says, "For I desired mercy." This is the Lord speaking through Hosea, the prophet, saying, "For I desired mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings." Okay? So what is God saying right there? He said, I would rather for you to have mercy upon someone than to sacrifice a lamb, sacrifice a goat. All right? If someone is hungry and you got a lamb or a goat, don't put it on the altar unless you're going to cook it for them. The Lord saying, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. All right? Let me look at the very next book of after Hosea is Joel. I think Joel talks about it too. Joel doesn't have 6 chapters, though, so it's not Joel. Was it Micah? Maybe it was Micah. Yeah, it was Micah 6:6. This is the Lord talking through the prophet Micah. And in Micah 6:6, the Lord says, "Wherewith shall I come before the Lord, and how shall myself be for the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves of a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, or with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God." And so we see right here, even in the book of Micah, the Lord is focusing on love and mercy and grace. Is the law important? Yes. But if the law ever comes into conflict with helping your fellow man, God would rather you have love, mercy, and grace versus trying to keep that particular law. Is that all right? And this is what Jesus, go back to Mark, the 2nd chapter. This is what Jesus is trying to emphasize to the Pharisees. The Pharisees are missing the boat because they're all about keeping the law and they're not about love, mercy, and grace. And so when Jesus is talking to them back in verse 25, where he says, have you not read? Have you never read? Jesus is saying, you guys should know this. And then he tells them the story about how David was hungry and things of that nature. And in verse 27, Jesus really brings this home. He said the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. All right? We shouldn't just stop what we're doing just because it's the Sabbath day, because God set that side of day for us. He didn't create a day and then he said, okay, man, I want you to serve the Sabbath. He said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Because did God need to rest on the Sabbath day? No, he didn't. But Jesus reveals to us that the reason God did that was to give us a day of rest and forgive us a day where we could set aside and meditate upon the Lord. But as we move into the New Testament, we learn that the Sabbath was not made, man was not made for the Sabbath. Let me get this right. That the Sabbath was not made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Amen? Okay. Now, and we have other scripture that backs this up. Hebrews 4:4 talks about it, and I think it's in Colossians, the 2nd chapter. It talks about the Sabbath as well. Let me see if I can find that real quick. There's a passage that talks about, Colossians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. It talks about in Colossians 2:16. It says, "Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of any holy day or of the new moon or of" what? The Sabbath day. All right? The Lord said, God's word said, "Let no man judge you in any of those things." Why? Because in verse 17 it says, "Which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ." All right? All the dietary laws and ordinances, priestly ordinances, that was nailed to the cross when Jesus was crucified. All right? But when Jesus rose from the dead, after Jesus died, we were under a new covenant. All right? And under this new covenant, we don't have to give respect to any holy days. We don't have to give respect to any Sabbath days. All right? And that's why if someone doesn't want to recognize Christmas as a holiday, and they don't want to recognize or celebrate Christmas, I'm not going to fall out of fellowship with them. I don't have a problem with that. Because the scripture tells us that we're to give no respect to holy days. All right? Are we okay with that?
Say that again.
If a person does not celebrate Christmas, I'm not going to fall out of fellowship with them as long as they know that they're saved by the blood of the Lamb. As long as they believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, no man cometh to the Father but by me. As long as they believe in how that salvation is by grace and it's not by works. If they don't want to celebrate Christmas, I'm not going to fall out of fellowship with them, because nowhere in Scripture does it say we have to celebrate Christmas.
It's just a tradition.
It is just a tradition. But Jesus said, and we read this earlier, that by your traditions you've made the word of God of none effect.
Yeah, just one of our traditions. It's not in there.
Yeah. And is there anything wrong?
Like all the rest of them.
And don't get me wrong, our household, we celebrate Christmas, and we don't have a problem with celebrating Christmas. But I'm not going to put my love of Christmas on someone else if they choose not to, because the scripture says give no respect to holidays or Sabbath days. All right? Just like the Seventh-day Adventurers would tell us, hey, you guys are wrong because you're worshiping on Sunday instead of Saturday, okay, which is the original Sabbath. That's where we get sábado from, okay, in Spanish, Saturday, right? Is that right? Okay, yeah. All right. So, but did I pronounce that wrong?
No.
Sábado? Sábado.
Not so much Saturday, but Sabbath.
Sábado. Okay, all right. Well, I had the Sabbath part in my brain, so I kind of let that come out. Igual. Okay. Isso. Okay. All right. That's Portuguese. But anyway, so, but the scripture tells us don't give respect to the Sabbath days. And then Jesus even says that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. So we don't have to have all of these crazy rules that they have over in Israel right now, where you can't push the button on the elevator as that's a violation of the Sabbath day. That's going on today, which is a crazy rule. All right? And it shouldn't be that way. All right?
You gotta use the stairs.
Huh?
You gotta use the stairs.
No, they don't use the stairs. They just have the elevator stop on every floor on the Sabbath, so that you don't have to do any work. You just get on the elevator and it just stops on every floor automatically. So
they're modern day Pharisees, are just like they used to be.
Yeah. They practice modern day Pharisees. A lot of them do. I mean, there are a lot of Jewish people who are Christians who are saved, but then there's many more who believe the same way the Pharisees believe, unfortunately. And that's why we have missionaries over there to witness to them. Okay, All right. So I know I got distracted there for a moment. We got to go ahead and wrap up. But anyway, the bottom line is here is that Jesus is teaching us that even in the Old Testament, where everyone was under the old covenant and where everyone was under the law as it relates to dietary laws and ceremonial laws, Jesus is saying even then, God would rather you have mercy and have a knowledge of him and have grace than to try to keep the law especially if it's going to negatively affect your fellow man. All right? So Jesus was telling them, look, we're hungry. There's no reason for you to try to tell us not to eat, and we're hungry, even if we're plucking corn on the Sabbath. All right? So Jesus said this is not a violation of the Sabbath because the Sabbath was made for me anyway, which means if something was made for you, that means you can do what you want to with it. Right? If a car is made for you, you don't honor the car and worship the car. Right? The car does what you want it to do. Hopefully. And if it doesn't, you get rid of it. Yeah. Or do what you want because it's yours, right? It's yours to do what you want. And so that's the same we should be with the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. All right? But anyway, so that's the end of that. Do we have any questions or comments about the end of about this latter part of Mark? Yes, sir.
This is just an important point, but regarding corn,
yes,
the Romans regarded corn as just about any kind of grain.
Yes.
When they go to that corn here, it sounds like the kind of corn we have. Do we have any idea about what actually they had for corn there?
This is a great question. The question is,
of course, I just wonder if it was
yes,
curiosity is anything like what we call corn.
That's very good. Not only in the New Testament, but in the Old Testament as well. The question was this corn really the type of corn that we eat today? It really depends upon when you look at it in context. If you look at it here in context, it would appear as though it's talking about corn that's similar to what we eat today. But if you look at other examples of where it talks about corn, going back even to the book of Ruth, all right? A lot of times when the Bible says corn, it's actually talking about kernels that could come from wheat, barley, or oats. Okay, now I believe in the book of Ruth, when it talks about that Ruth was gleaning corn and that she was harvesting corn, more than likely she was harvesting some type of wheat. Because later on in the book of Ruth, it talks about how the corn was taken through the threshing floor, right? And you know how you have to thresh the grains and all of that type of stuff. And so in context, this particular instance, it may be talking about the type of corn that we're talking about, but then again, it could be talking about wheat, barley, or some other type of grain that is harvested.
But if it were that kind, though, you wouldn't just be eating it. It's like a horse could eat, but you couldn't eat it. Right, exactly. So more than
specify corn, where in other places they talk about grain.
Well, there are some places where in Scripture where corn and grain or kernels are used interchangeably. But I believe in this instance, more than likely, it's talking about the type of corn that we would eat, corn on the cob, because it actually says ears of corn in verse 23. And so that you wouldn't have an ear of grain, for instance. I don't think you would have is there such a thing as an ear of wheat? I didn't grow up on wheat farms. I know nothing about wheat. Okay, so I just know about corn, but more than likely this is talking about the type of corn that we eat on a cob.
I read that the corn we have originated in North America. I could be wrong on that. That's what I read. I just wondered, maybe they had some over there.
They may have had some other offshoot of corn.
Yeah. You don't eat an ear of wheat.
Well, there's some types of corn you don't eat because you feed it to cows and pigs. It's not worth human consumption.
Right.
There's different types of corn.
Yeah.
Like the yellow corn.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting confused now.
Oh, wow. Okay. And on that note, we're going to, Lord willing, the next time we meet, which won't be, not scheduled to meet next Sunday, we want to cover John, the first chapter, and talk about Andrew. Believe it or not, we're still talking about the disciples, the apostles of Jesus. We want to talk about Andrew next Sunday, so we'll ask that you read the entire first chapter of John, which introduces to us Andrew and how Andrew he was once a follower of John the Baptist, but he later becomes a follower of Jesus. And so that happens in the very first chapter of St. John, not 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, but St. John. All right? So let's be ready to do that in a couple of weeks. And Lord willing, I'll email the next memory verses that we'd like for us to do.